Listen, there's a lot of information out there about things that you should watch out for when you're buying a business. And some of it's right, some of it's not so right. Today, we're going to kind of give you a guideline, a framework, if you will, for how to think through this, how to understand it, how to make heads or tails of what you might see if you're thinking about buying a business. We're going to be ranking the biggest to the worst or to the not so big red flags that you might see when you're doing due diligence to buy a business. We're going to be talking about the things that you should be worried about that should make you run, and the things that you should not be so worried about. So when we're ranking these, if it's in the S tier at the top, that is the biggest types of red flags you should absolutely watch out for. A tier is going to be something that is pretty problematic. It may not be a deal killer, but it's probably still going to be. It's not the worst thing you could see, but it's pretty bad. B tier is something that is a little bit of a problem, but it's not going to be a deal killer. It's something you can work through. C tier, it's a bit of a yellow flag. It's something you should definitely proceed with some caution on. It's something that you should ask some questions on, but it's not going to be a deal killer by any means. And your D tiers are things that honestly you really shouldn't even be so worried about. So diving in, first one that we're going to talk about is if the business is, if it's an old and not so sexy business. So for this one, let's see where we've got this. Actually, let's go with this one first. We're going to go no verified financials. So no verified financials. This is going to be something that is we're going to go S tier on this one. And this is if the business refuses to provide verified financials, like they're just not willing to do them. That is something that is going to be an absolute deal killer. If you can't get any kind of verified financials for the business, then you're really just not going to be able to make an accurate assessment of it at all. It's going to be a complete deal killer. You just can't do it.
No, I feel like it's different than a sim, where if you're only getting a sim, it's more of a B tier situation, but there's just simply no numbers, or they're all, like we've pointed out, when the numbers are perfectly rounded, like 600,000, 700, when they're all very easily quantifiable numbers, usually that's the sign of some pretty rough financial stuff, and they're just trying to give you a very vague idea of what it could make is always the language in those.
Yep. The next one is if the business is old and unsexy. If the business is old and unsexy, this is going to be a D tier. This is not something you should be worried about at all. I would actually say on the flip side, this is something you should be excited about. That means there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, for growth, for improving the profits of the business.
I mean, that's kind of a gimme for us on this one. I mean, we see it all the time. We talk about it all the time. The idea and concept of sexy business is kind of weird in and of itself, but the tried and true things are tried and true for a reason. So the business itself, if it's old, it should not be a red flag.
Completely agree. And the next thing is, let's see, we're going to say if the revenue is kind of flat, meaning let's say the business did the same amount of revenue the last couple of years. This is something I think maybe not everyone will agree with this. People get very concerned about this. This is going to be another D tier ranking. This is really not something you should be altogether that concerned with. A lot of times what we see is this just means that the owner's gotten comfortable. They're kind of at a place where maybe they stepped back a little bit. I'm working on due diligence for a business right now where this is the case. And it's not something that we're super worried about. They just they got comfortable and they haven't put a ton of effort into growth.
Yeah, I think it really also depends on your processes and education and abilities within that structure of business. If you don't have a lot of experience in that area of business that you're buying, you might be more concerned because you won't even know how to grow it if it's just standing still. So I think that's where you can kind of see some people bumping it up to possibly B tier, But I think for the average easy to learn business or business you have experience in, it's definitely going to be in the S tier.
The next one is the lease is expiring soon for the business. And this is going to fall kind of middle of the road. The reason I'm putting this middle of the road, we're going to go B tier with this, is this really depends on the business, right? There's some businesses where maybe they have a lease for an office that they're working out of, and it's really not that big of a deal if they had to change locations. Maybe some people work from home. Maybe it's just a regular office and you can relocate it and not have a lot of trouble. But in some cases, let's say you've got like a restaurant or you've got like a machine shop or something where there's a lot of equipment set up. These are businesses that depend a lot on having that lease in place. And there's actually a lot of risk to the business if the lease is about to expire. So this is really going to be a case-to-case kind of situation.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the business, and it depends on if the owner owns the land that you're renting or if it's a separate landlord. That can also affect, in my mind, where I'm going to put it up there.
Now, next one is a big spike in revenue right before the sale. We're going to call this an A tier. This is sometimes a really big problem. Now, it's not always a bad thing. That's why we're not ranking it an S tier. But if you see a really big revenue spike or a really big profit spike right before, there's a decent chance that there's something being gamed behind the scenes in the accounting. And you should be, this is something that is very likely to throw a wrench in the deal that you're trying to put together. It's something that maybe you can dive deep enough and figure out where it's coming from. There's a real explanation. We're talking about very extreme spikes here. This is usually going to be something a little bit problematic worth looking into, maybe something that might fundamentally change the way the deal works.
Yeah, going from good to great is all well and good, but if it's only 1 year of good to great, I mean, I've even dug deep on if they have one good year and I see of 5 years what happened. And sometimes it's a little bit of cook in the books, and sometimes, like we found, it's just industry. You have a big year for hurricanes, your removal service tends to get really good that year. So there can be some explanation, which is, I think, why A is a good spot for it.
Now, next one is going to be messy financials. We're going to call this a C tier. This is something that this is not going to kill your deal. It might make your deal a little bit harder, and you might find something is different than how it was portrayed once you get into the financials. But just messy financials is not really something that's going to be a massive, massive issue for you to deal with. It's just something that you got to be aware of and you've got to know how to navigate. It's not going to kill your deal, though. It's really not a huge deal, just something you need to be cautious about.
Honestly, it's the standard. Very rare is it to find somebody in the businesses that we look at where the financials are clean and up to date or even well done. I mean, you're dealing with small business. It's going to be messy to get in there unless you have a stellar broker that you're working with who they're working with too.
That's right. The next one is going to be 50% or more of the revenue is coming from a single customer. This is an S tier of all S tiers. If you see this, what else do I got to say? Just run. You can lose that one customer the day after you buy the business and you're completely done for. It's just going to crumble the business. You overpaid, you won't be able to cover the debt service, or you just overpaid, and it's going to be a huge problem.
I mean, there's a certain mix you want to have, and usually it's, you don't want more than 50% of your revenue coming from your top 5 customers. And I've even seen a business where 80% of the revenue was coming from one business, and it was the guy's brother-in-law business. And I'm not certain, but I would say that if the brother-in-law left the one business, he's probably going to find somebody else to work with. I'm not guaranteed that contract.
That's right. So definitely something you want to watch out for. Now, on the opposite end, if the seller is looking for some seller financing, some might see this and say, why would they be willing to do that? Do they not feel like the business is worth that much? But this is not something to be worried about at all. This is going to be a D tier as far as red flags. not at all something I would be worried about. This actually usually just means that they want to structure their taxes a little bit better. It's going to be better on them for their tax purposes if they can spread out the payment over a little bit of time, and it's going to be good for you. So I would not worry about it if they're looking for seller financing.
No, I mean just on principle, they're putting themselves on the hook with the business. Business doesn't make money, they don't get paid. So if anything, that's a very positive sign.
That's right. Now, the next one that we're going to do is let's see. If they have had multiple failed sales, meaning they've tried to sell the business and it's fallen through a couple of times, this is something I'm going to put up in A tier. Now, this one might be a little controversial, but the best predictor of the future is going to be the past. And if they have not been able to get a deal done, if it was one time, maybe it was more on the buyer before. If it was a couple times even, maybe it was a bad buyer a couple times. But most of the time, if it's been a few different failed sale attempts, that means there's something wrong with the business that is causing those people to pass on it.
I think it's a bit harsh to put it at A. I'd probably say B. You know, it may, you know, you may be the one that finally gets in the deal, because enough times getting the door slammed in your face because your price is too high. Maybe you're the guy that he says, fine, I'll come down to the price, I just need to get this thing over with. That's always a circumstance, but uh, again, it depends on if you're trying to do this off market or if you're working with a broker, because that can drastically sway how and why those actually happen.
It's a good point. The next one, if the owner is taking a very low salary, something unusually low for who they are and what they're doing, something I'm going to put in C tier. This is something that is not uncommon to see. A lot of times they take kind of just a necessary salary and the rest they'll just take in distributions. This is something that should raise a little bit of a flag for you, and you should be wondering, are they trying to artificially boost the profit just to create something that looks good for a sale? And you should be just adding back what it's actually going to take to pay yourself when you buy it and factoring that into the equation. But this is not something that's going to kill your deal.
No, this is textbook using your business as a piggy bank, and those are always messy to untangle. So seeing that, you're wondering, okay, how much of this guy's life is tied up in this business? How many cars, boats, houses are in this guy's business that he bought them under?
Now, the next one might be a very obvious one when I say it, but it's worth saying nonetheless. If you find any evidence in your due diligence of any kind of financial fraud, that is an S tier. If they were committing financial fraud as part of this process, that's a huge tell that they're trying to hide things and that they're misrepresenting the business, and you should run with both feet and another set if you can find them.
Devil's advocate. If they didn't get caught, that just means you can now do fraud.
Now that's a separate
Devil's advocate, not financial advice. Just saying, if it was good enough for them, odds are you're buying a good fraud machine.
It's a good argument.
Not advice. I'd move it down to C.
Okay, so the next one is that if you find out that key employees are likely to be leaving, that's going to be an A tier ranking. Now, depends on how key the employee is, and this might be different from business to business, right? But in general, if the key employees are leaving, one, that's probably a bad sign. It means that there might be something wrong or going on with the business. But two, you're probably not going to be able to run the business the same way that it was if some of the key employees are leaving. So this is something, this is not the worst possible thing that you could see, but this is something pretty likely to kill your deal.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on where you are in your deal lifespan. Some people, if they're buying a business that they've already been running in a different area, they can just insert their own people. Some people really want everybody gone. to kind of refresh, or at least they want a chunk of people gone. So I could see if maybe you had a large pool of talent that you knew you had on hand, perhaps this is something where you would put it lower on the risk scale. But I would say in general, if you're losing the majority of your staff off the rip, it will just inevitably be a more uphill battle to get it back up and running.
Now, you might have noticed we're a little short on some of the stuff in the middle here. So I'm going to throw a couple rapid fire ones at you that are just things that are a little bit of a concern, but not the worst thing ever. First one is if the business has, some bad online reviews, that's something that can be a little bit problematic, something you should be looking into. Really depends on what's in the reviews, but just take a look at it and make an assessment from there. But it's not going to be a deal killer necessarily or the end of the world. Another one is excessive ad backs, or just excessive things being added back from things that are owner benefits into the profit to try to inflate the picture of profit. If there's a ridiculous amount of them, that's something, that warrants some closer looks and some closer consideration. And it might be something that, changes the picture of what the business is actually worth to you.
I mean, I guess to me personally, the ad backs I would bump it up a tier, because that's right on the inflating numbers category for me. Ad backs are just like the little brother of that. It also goes in line with the using the business as a piggyback. So I can see where if it wasn't a ton, it could be a B tier. But I think when you see a lot of ad backs coming into a business where to the extent of they were negative and then after ad backs they were very positive, you really need to have some good accounting referrals come in and check out whatever they're doing. Because again, how do you go from negative to 400K positive? That's a lot of ad backs.
Great point. Yeah, everything is in context with everything else, right? Some of these things can be worse than others if they are extreme. But speaking of things that could be a problem if they're extreme, if you have incredibly key contracts to the business, meaning things that are a giant chunk of the revenue, you find out that those contracts are non-transferable or they're not going to continue for some reason. This is if the contracts are very key to the business. This is something that we're going to put at the S tier. If they're not going to be able to continue, that's a material difference in what the business is going to be able to continue to do. Doesn't make sense to pay for something that you're not going to be able to continue.
I mean, it's just honestly no notes. Just next. That sums it up. I got nothing on that. I can't even devil advocate that one.
The next one, we talked about this before, but if there's a moderate amount of customer concentration, that's going to be a C tier ranking. This is something to kind of proceed with some caution on, but it's not going to kill your deal most likely. Now, we're talking probably if there's concentration in a customer of under 20%. If any customer is making up more than 20% or even really more than 15% of revenue, that's when things get a little bit shaky and could be a problem. But if it's moderate, if it's like 10 to 15%, 15% to 20% from a customer or two, that's not the end of the world. You could still make that business work. So I'm going to put that one as a C tier.
I mean, that one just comes down to how much you're fluent in marketing and or the industry. If you guys are watching this, go watch our episode last week. We interviewed some guys that target businesses that may not be the nicest or may not have like the craziest numbers, but they know what they can do to them. And if they meet some check marks, they can take a moderate book and turn it into a massive book. So if you want to see a masterclass on how to do that, go watch our last episode.
All right. And we're getting into the final stretch of the last 10 or so here. So we're going to go a little rapid fire here to round out some of these last ones. Next one is if you see the seller or whoever's representing the seller just being evasive during the due diligence process, I'm going to put that as an A tier. And the reason I don't put it as an S tier is, everything is about interpretation. If they're just busy, they might seem evasive, but they're not actually. But if you feel like they're being evasive, this is something it's going to make, even if it's not intentional, it's not on purpose, this is going to make it very difficult to get a deal done because you really need them committed in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had those where you've texted somebody, you've been in contact, and they just ghost you. And I mean, one of the only ways that we found that you can get regular good information is going through a good broker, because then they got their feet to the fire. So a way to avoid it is to have good intermediaries for whatever you're doing these transactions. But if somebody's just going to ghost you, they're going to ghost you.
Now, two more that are really not that big of a deal and are going to fall into our D tier category. If the owner has lots of relationships with the customers, this is something that people get very concerned about. And, it's really not that big of a deal unless, these customers are not going to continue with the owner, or if they're going to leave or go somewhere else with the owner. This is usually something that you see in a business, and typically you just make a plan around the transition. Another one that's kind of a common misconception is people feel like if the business is arriving on a public marketplace, that means it's just not a good business. And that's not the case. That a lot of times a broker will take it straight to a public marketplace. Now, you might want to look into the history of it and see if there's been attempts to sell it before, but I think that's kind of a common misconception.
Yeah, I think specifically you can say that you compare it to houses. Oh, if you went on Zillow and said every house on Zillow wasn't good enough to sell privately, that's insanity. There are tons of great houses, and also, why would you not want a ton of eyes on your business to get the most options for a buyer? So that one I find I have the most contempt with, and I think that's sort of a made up issue that people push when it comes to businesses. So I would never. I don't think anyone should ever consider that a negative. In fact, more of a positive.
On the other end, though, if the business is completely dependent on the owner, if it relies on them a lot, we're going to put this at an S tier. This is just not something you can make work unless you want to buy a job, which, you can get a job for free, and I hear they pay you too. So if the business is completely dependent on the owner, that's going to be an S tier. That is going to be one of the biggest red flags, and you should run.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of middle ground is like, if you are an HVAC guy and you buy an HVAC business and it's like Chuck and his three sons, and you're buying it from Chuck and it's just you and Chuck's three sons. Yeah, you bought a job, but you now have more upward mobility, I guess, and more scalability because it's on your terms. But I think for the average person who might be coming to a business not being a veteran of the industry, if it's all running through the owner, you're gonna have a really bad time.
Right. Couple more towards the top, but not the worst thing you could find. If the industry itself is in decline, that's a problem. Honestly, it's not the worst thing you could possibly find, but it will probably kill your deal, and probably should. Just beware of an industry in decline. And if the business has pending litigation, this one, I would even maybe argue for, I'm going to put this in B tier as well. It really depends on the business. When you get to a certain size of business, there's just likely to be some kind of pending litigation going on at most of the time. So I would take it in context and see what it is and what the scope of it is, the size of it is. But it's something that could cause some problems with your deal. It might make it difficult to transfer the business. So definitely something to watch out for, and something you might need to look into.
Yeah, I guess take case by case on that one. Probably would just overall stay away from those.
Now, another little rapid fire of things that are right down the middle. If there are no written contracts for the business, this is something that, it's not ideal, but there's a lot of industries that just work this way. We're working on one in the dumpster rental industry right now. They don't have written contracts, and I mean, sometimes they have service agreements, but they're not locked into contracts. There's not guaranteed revenue really. That's just the standard of the industry. There's a lot of other things that go with it that make it not such a big deal in context. So it really depends on the industry, whether this is going to be a big problem or not. Single supplier risk, if the business depends heavily on a single supplier, again, just take this in stride. This could be a big deal, but if you have a good relationship with a supplier that could work with this, and maybe you can bring some of those relationships, then it's not so big of a deal. Another one to kind of round out this section is if the owner is looking for an unusually short transition period, then this is something that, this is something that could be a problem. You might want to unpack it a little bit and understand just why they're looking for a short transition period, but it's not going to be the end of the world. It's likely not going to kill your deal. You might be able to negotiate that a little bit.
I mean, the supplier analogy I always use is, would you put all of your money into one stock and one stock only? If you wouldn't do that, then you shouldn't go with only a singular supplier. In the shorter window, I think, the buyer doesn't understand how much power that gives them. I think while you may feel like you're on their schedule, if you're going along with them, they're more on yours at that point. So you're going to be able to force the hand a little bit more with what you're asking for and what you want from them.
Now, couple more things. Last two here. If the business is behind on technology, I was going to put that in the C tier, but you know what? I'm actually going to put that in the D tier. This is really not a big deal. It could cause a problem here, a problem there. Say all the business's records are on paper files or something, that might cause a little bit of a problem for you. If that's the case, if they have nothing digital, then that might be a little bit more of a C tier. But on the same hand, if you have a good understanding of technology, this can be a huge opportunity to improve the business and grow it faster. Just a bigger lever to pull. And then the last one here is if the seller has a very urgent personal reason for selling the business, we're going to put that as a C tier. This sometimes can be to your benefit as the buyer. Sometimes this is, this means that the sale is going to get across quicker and more efficiently and maybe on better terms sometimes. But by the same token, you've got to be patient in this process. And that goes for both sides. You have to be patient as the buyer. You have to be patient as the seller. So this could cause some problems, something to watch out for and understand in context. If there's like a medical reason, a divorce, or something like that, that could throw a little bit of a wrench into the process and make it a little bit difficult to work with them. So just something to take in stride and think about what it is and if it's going to affect that.
Yeah, I think the technology one to me is kind of it could go higher. I do think that if you buy a business that's service based and they are just purely paper, no CRM, you're buying a lot more work than you think you are. So you should seriously consider what they're asking, what you're willing to pay, because you will be transitioning that entire business onto a CRM at some points. And that is no small feat in and of itself.
That's right. Now, this has been not an exhaustive list of all the possible red flags that you could find, but hopefully if you're someone who's thinking about buying a business, or maybe you're thinking about selling a business, you can think through some of these things and just try to understand, how does this affect what the other side is thinking? How does this affect, how the transaction is going to work? And if you're buying a business, hopefully this can help you avoid some mistakes. But until the next time, we do this show every Tuesday night, right around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tune in. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know if there's deals you want to talk about. Find Ryan or myself on LinkedIn at our names as you see them on the screen, Ryan Santo MBA or Brody Vincent MBA. Shoot us a message if there's something you want us to cover, or if you want to come on the show and join us and talk about some of this stuff. Until the next time, we'll see you then.